there, welcome to the 412 Canada podcast. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kim Hutchins. At 412, we're equipping the church for greater influence through serving. 412 is a ministry of Faith Baptist Church in Huntsville, Ontario. We are so excited to be able to continue to equip you through our podcast and YouTube. And today I'm so excited to bring you Dr. Rob Meeder. Rob was on our podcast last year and we chatted about healthy limits with technology, mental health and anxiety, as well as collaboratively problem solving as a family. Rob had so many helpful things to say that we thought it'd be great to have him back. Rob is one of the hosts of the Smart Family podcast, which offers practical advice for all family relationships to help you love being home. Rob is also the director of Family, Child, and Youth Mental Health at Waypoint Center for Mental Health Care and has been practicing in the Simcoe-Muskoka area since 2003. In this episode, we're going to talk about technology, setting healthy boundaries in it, and so much more. Let's get started. Rob, it's so great that you can be back again.
Oh, thanks, Kim. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah.
Nice to talk to you again.
Yeah, and I'm excited about our conversation that we're going to jump into today. But before we do, can you tell me something fun that you like to do?
Oh, fun. Geez, I haven't done something fun for a while. No, no, but I think it's actually important to take some time to do something fun. And for me, I love, I'm a kind of guy who likes to do exercise on a regular basis, so I bike. So I cycle quite a bit. I've kind of cycled all the roads in my area and do a lot of road biking, and so that's sort of my downtime.
Nice.
And so some people golf for hours, I bike for hours. And so kind of dissociate and think about things, and it's kind of time for me to rejuvenate. So that's what I do for fun.
And do you go on your own or do you go with somebody?
You know what, I do both.
Okay.
So I'll have time when I just completely go by myself and I go at my own pace and sort of push myself a little bit. And then sometimes I go with a group, and that's fun too. That's a real social part. And you know, sometimes you push each other, but sometimes you just kind of relax and talk too. So it can be, cycling can be a lot of fun as a huge group or as an individual. So it's one of those great sports.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, and so I'm excited about today's conversation, like I said. We touched on it like a little bit last time about technology and said we'd get into it.
Right.
And when you were on our audio podcast a while back, we did talk a little bit more, but now things have really changed, right? There's been a lot that's happened in over a year, and just let's talk about healthy technology, right?
Is that like an oxymoron? Healthy
I know, right?
No, but you know, I think that for sure there can be a healthy balance of how we use technology. And you're right, like we were worried about screen time before the pandemic.
Yes.
And then the pandemic hits, and then suddenly like we are on screen time out of necessity. We're having to use it for school. We're connecting with our grandparents. We're connecting with each other that way, you know, because we're not physically getting together as much anymore, especially for those first few weeks and months. And so that was really the only way we could connect was through screen time. And then plus it became our downtime too. So you throw in that, all of that in there.
And you're on it like 24/7, right?
You're on, and even my work too, you know, we changed to virtual because I do mental health. And so it was very amenable to changing to a virtual format. And so a lot of visits happened over telemedicine or like Zoom type calls. And all of my meetings shifted towards, you know, Zoom calls. And I think going forward, it's going to be a bit of a hybrid. You know, we're not going back completely to everything in person. I think we're going to, and I hope we take the best of technology and blend it with, you know, the best of what we had before in person and come up with a hybrid that's actually going to, you know, be healthy. And I think that's the challenge because we've seen how easy it is for kids, young kids especially, to kind of really get into games, you know, almost to the point of where it looks like addiction, you know. And I've seen some kids even in visits, you know, really having real difficulty turning a device off, or disconnecting or disengaging from a device to then having a conversation. Now, sometimes that's more like an avoidance type behavior.
Right, it's easier just to be on the device.
Or they're feeling, it's a comfort, like a security blanket kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think all of us, and not just kids, all of us to some extent have really gotten into our devices for better or for worse. And so I think it's time to maybe find a healthy balance and to dial back a little bit. And I myself too, it's easy to kind of check the news or check your email at all times. Yeah. And I've had to take some practical steps to say, like, okay, I can't do that, whether it's putting your phone away in a drawer, not having it at the bedside, in the bedroom, just putting it downstairs to charge. Like that's just some practical things that I've done. I don't want my phone to be the last thing I see before I fall asleep and the first thing I grab when I wake up. I think that that's just too much.
Yeah. And just realizing, right, you need to set some healthy boundaries.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we do that for ourselves, if we want that for our kids, I think it's really important we do that for ourselves. One of the talks I give, I kind of go through some really healthy rules for kids. All the parents go,
yeah.
And then I put a slide that says, same rules for the parents.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but if we don't model what we want our kids to do, it's just not going to have the same power. And so when I say, turn the Wi-Fi off or turn screens off, an hour before bed, that's really good for adults too.
Yeah.
That's not just for kids. And so we can't just sit there and go like, okay, that sounds good for our kids. No, like we got to apply that to ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I'm really hoping that moving forward we find that healthy hybrid balance. I hope, and we know now schools, in-person learning is valuable for most kids. There are some kids actually who have done better with online learning, but the majority of kids need that in-person interaction.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we can never go back to any online or virtual learning. That can still be a tool that we can use to enhance our overall learning. And I think we've seen it in other environments as well. My work, for example, I'm glad I don't have to travel to all my different meetings.
Yeah, that would be crazy, right?
Around the hospital or around my area. It's just so easy to click on Zoom and be in a meeting. But there's going to be many times, though, where I'm like, I wish I was actually physically in the room with these people, because our conversation, really, you can have a much better conversation in person, right?
Yeah.
We've all had that 0.1 second Zoom lag where we're all starting each other's conversations and you're talking over the other person.
And then it just gets so awkward, right? So
Exactly. Even just this interaction here, like in person, this would be stilted and funny and awkward sometimes if we were online, right? Because, it just seems a bit more scripted and unreal when you're not with another person.
Yeah.
So that's happened. That's true for schools. It's true for churches. It's true for really most interaction that we have. Yes, technology is a great tool, but in person is so important. And we've seen some kids really lose their in-person, face-to-face skills, their conversational skills.
Yes, right. I've noticed
kids
that.
aren't making eye contact anymore because on a screen you don't really need to make eye contact, right? And so we just need to be careful that kids do still have those experiences so that they can grow those interpersonal skills, because you can't do that online. So I would say it's a healthy balance. It's never like, okay, all technology is bad. And
I know, because it's in everything, right? So you can't just completely turn it off.
Totally. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's going to become more ingrained, hopefully more seamlessly ingrained in how we operate and function. But in the end, it's got to help us, right? We don't want it to drive us further apart.
Right.
And so, and that's just talking about the technology itself. We haven't talked about content yet.
No.
Right? What are we actually
we'll
doing
get into
online?
that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's jump into that. For boys and girls, it is a little bit different about who is doing what online, right?
You're right. And these are general trends. Obviously it's not 100%, but we see, boys particularly want to get into gaming, and they're less interested in the social media part, and then girls tend to be more into the social media, into the relationship aspects of communication and technology. And again, that's not 100%. Obviously, there's it kind of spills over across genders, but that's sort of a general effect we've seen. And it is easy for for boys, if anybody who's gaming, you get into a zone. It's called flow. Like you're in that zone, and hours can pass, and you don't even realize it. My own son has said it to me. He says, "Dad, it's just so weird. Like I start playing, and then I look up and realize, oh, I've been playing for 2 hours, and it doesn't feel like that." And it's because it's the same phenomenon as people who may have problems with gambling, who start and they realize, okay, now I've been here for 6 hours and I'm trying to go to the bathroom, and that happens with gaming too. Those things are meant to be addictive. I mean, you're fighting, psychologists in Silicon Valley who have designed all these games and platforms to keep your eyeballs glued to the screen, right? And so they use every psychological tool to make that happen, because ultimately that's where the money comes from. You keep eyeballs glued to screens. They see ads and other content that is revenue generating, and that's really what the goal is. And so it's come out more and more recently as some of these platforms have been exposed, that they really can be harmful to kids, and the same areas of the brain are affected that are involved with addiction, and so behavioral addictions. And that's the one side. And then of course the content for social media can sometimes be really negative too. Again, not always. There's some really great positive funny stuff. I mean, I've laughed my head off at certain TikToks, and it's like, that's so true, and funny memes that go on and kind of get spread around, and it's just fun for a laugh. But there's the dark side of that too, right? And there's a dark side to the internet. We see a lot of negative influence can happen there, especially if kids are in a more vulnerable situation, or they just don't kind of see how vulnerable they are. They can be really prone to misinformation, to negative information. There's images around body image, for example, is one area that there's just a real false and negative message being sent out there that you need to look like this and do these things.
Yeah,
and it just can be dangerous.
It's right in your face. And so how would you set a healthy limit for that?
Well, as our kids get older, we give them more and more freedom, right? And yes, we still have influence, but in the early years, we really are still our kids' frontal lobe, and our frontal lobe deals with, self-regulation and executive function skills, and that just is not yet fully developed in kids. And so it's our role as parents to be that frontal lobe for our kids, that prefrontal cortex where all those, skills grow and develop. And those skills develop for 25 years. They don't, that's not like 3 years you're done.
I know, right?
That starts at like minus 9 months, to when you're born to like 25 years later.
Wow.
And so, and of course, you're not going to tell your 20-year-old what to do anymore. They're on their own.
I know,
but
it's
when
such a
they're
different
4,
story.
5, 6, 8, 9, we really do have to help our kids. And you do it in a way that is positive, and so reminding, like, look, hey, I know you've been on there for a couple hours, like 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes, just finish what you're doing. Sometimes just yanking the plug out of the wall is probably not going to help your relationship. Or, I've heard of parents breaking tablets or throwing them out of car windows. And that just sets a negative example. And then the other thing, Kim, is really important, is that we do what we ask our kids to do. And I know that sounds like, well, why is that? And because, we can talk about all these different examples of here are some practical things and tips and limits, but really those are as good and necessary for us. I've seen as many parents glued to their devices as kids when they should be interacting.
Because it's so easy, right? And we've been doing it now for so long.
Right, and we know how even, especially in the early years, how face-to-face connection, eye contact, playing those peekaboo type games, those serve and return type games are just so important. Well, they're just not happening because we're checking. And again, it's sometimes we're actually doing useful stuff. We're actually, looking up a recipe for dinner or the grocery list, or checking an email, from a relative that needs to be, dealt with right now. But, we have to really set similar limits for ourselves and really cut back on the mindless scrolling for hours and just re-engage physically with our kids to, promote healthy development. And so, same rules for parents as for the kids, and that.
So we don't get off easy.
No, we don't. As human beings, we see this as a human problem, not just as a kid problem.
Yeah. And so, what behaviors too are you seeing out of this?
Like, what do you mean? So,
well, like if they've been on gaming a lot, right? And so, are you seeing an effect in their behavior?
Yeah. Well, it really can be hard. The longer a child is on, a device, the harder it is to take it away.
Yes.
They kind of get caught up in it. They develop streaks, or they're on there for a certain length of time, and so you're just going to see more and more negative interactions when you try to limit that, right? So it's best to start early and then gradually, build on giving more and more freedom and fewer restrictions as they get older, as opposed to kind of, free for all until they're 10 and then realizing, oh shoot, what do I do here?
Oh no!
And then, one of the worst things you can do is completely take a teenager's device away, right? Because that's just going to backfire.
It is, because that's how they connect now with everybody,
too, totally. Right? And again, there's that positive side to it as well. And we've even during COVID, we've seen a lot of kids be able to maintain their schooling, to maintain their connections because of technology that we wouldn't have had 20 years ago. So there's that whole positive side as well. We can't just be kind of all harping on it and negative about it, saying it's terrible. Yes, there is that dark side to it, but it's a lot of good too. And so, if you take away I've always said those are kind of extreme measures, especially as kids get older, become high, it can backfire actually. They're not just ineffective, they can actually backfire and cause the opposite of what we intend to see.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so how can you reframe behavior? We were talking a little bit about this earlier, so.
Yeah. Okay, so I talk a lot about behavior because, it's interesting because a lot of what's called a mental health issue, a mental disorder, is actually just challenging behavior.
Right.
And so, and behavior is really what we see when a child is trying to cope with a stress.
Right.
And we, even us as adults, we all have, subconscious defense strategies and defense mechanisms that we use to cope with stressors. So, and sometimes these strategies are adaptive. They're good. Like we use our words to solve a problem, or if we're hungry, we eat something. If or we take a break, or we do some exercise. That's all like stress reducing.
Yeah.
But sometimes they're maladaptive, right? And so these are stress. How else we could deal with stress if we don't have those positive coping skills? Sometimes we resort to things like hitting or kicking or punching or fighting or yelling or arguing or even self-harm or substance use, that is kind of more extreme examples. But all those things are ways that we use to cope with stress. And those things they might benefit in the short term, they make us feel better. If you drink alcohol, you're going to feel less inhibited and the stress kind of melts away. But that never helps in the long term, right? Those things are never helpful in the long term. That's how you identify as being a maladaptive strategy.
Okay.
Now, for young kids, like those kind of negative strategies, it's easy to say like, well, that's misbehavior, when really we should be looking at it as stress behavior.
Okay, that's a different way to look at it.
Yeah,
that's really
totally.
Good.
That's the reframing that I talk about, like putting on those different lenses and saying like, okay, that's just a kid doing the best with what they know to cope with stress.
Yeah.
And so a lot of tantrums, a lot of that oppositional behavior. That's why I don't like diagnoses like oppositional defiant disorder, because they really blame the kid for the behavior when really, in fact, what they're trying to do is the best they can with a certain stressor, whether that's a social stressor, whether that's a cognitive stressor, whether that's a biological stressor. There's different domains of stress, and kids just try to cope. And so we got to help those kids shift from using those maladaptive coping strategies to more adaptive ones, more ones that are positive, that are growth enhancing, that grow them, right? Because these maladaptive ones, first of all, they can be harmful, you know, physically, psychologically, socially, but they also harm relationships. Right. It's hard to be nice to a kid, whether you're a parent or a teacher or a friend, to a kid who is exhibiting these strategies, right? And it's like, okay, I can maybe manage it for a while, and as parents, they're our kids. We can't just abandon them. Like we have to kind of live with that. But you know, it's just hard. It's just harder, and the relationships get frayed. And strained.
That's
that then elicits more negative responses, and you get this sort of downward spiral that happens in these kids that just get, you know, one negative experience after another negative experience, and then they respond in a way that elicits more negative responses.
It just keeps going down.
And we've seen these kids, you know, they have a difficult time in school, and then that just follows them to the next grade. And then, you know, it's hard for them to make friends, and you just see this negative spiral just develop like that, and then they're stuck. And so their interest in school drops, and they don't do well in school anymore. They don't want to go to school, you know, and then those kids are at high risk for dropping out and really struggling.
And so when you see that downward spiral, what are some steps you can take as a parent, or what steps do you take to help somebody to reverse that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is actually what I just talked about, is reframing, right? Putting on those different lenses and saying like, okay, you know, very few kids wake up in the morning and say like, okay, how am I going to just really tick off my teacher today? I mean, there might be some kids that do that, but really the majority of kids, like when you see that type of behavior, it's what I call stress behavior. Sometimes it catches even them off guard, because it's just almost like a reflex or a subconscious sort of defense reaction that they have. And so seeing it as that, as opposed to, you know, it will elicit much more empathy from us. And when kids see that, and so one of the best things that you can do when you see a kid really struggling through their behavior, to try and say, what are you trying to communicate? What is it that's, because the behavior is just a signal. It's a tip of the iceberg. Okay. What's underneath that's driving that? You know, was there something going on at school today with your friends, with your teacher? Was there, you know, are you having difficulty with the material at school? You know, are you being bullied? Like, what are the big drivers of that behavior that we're seeing, the tip of the iceberg that we're seeing? Like, what are something underneath the surface that we maybe really need to pay attention to? Right. Because, you know, you can treat the tip of the iceberg there, and you can sort of like help a kid through a temper tantrum, but that's just going to happen again. If we don't deal with the underlying issue, right? That's underneath the surface. So I think just reframing it that way as parents will help us to understand our kids' behavior and realize, okay, this is not just some mental health disorder that, you know, this diagnosis needs this treatment or this medication. But okay, let's see, what does this actually mean? Like, what's actually being communicated here? Because I always say all behavior is communication. Everything
that's a good point.
is the kid trying to tell you something, maybe not through their words, which is what we want. Those are the lucky kids. Those are the kids we don't worry about.
Just sit down and tell me, what is it?
But it's those kids who are using those maladaptive strategies are the ones that often get labeled, and diagnosed, and misunderstood, and then they struggle, right? So if we can shift our thinking to like, what are you trying to tell us? What can we help you with? What's leading to that behavior? And that will do a world of good to make that downward spiral become really an upward spiral.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Right, because positive influences and positive experiences lead to more positive experiences. We've seen that too. Right, so there's as much of an upward spiral as there's a downward spiral.
Yeah, and that's okay. And I think it's good for us to recognize as a parent, right? Where are your kids in that? Where are you maybe even in that, right? And just
right. Because we often, like, it's hard for us to shift that thinking, because many of us were brought up in that way of thinking that, you know, when a kid's being bad, they're trying to get attention. They're manipulating us. Right. You know, they're trying to push our buttons. Those are words we use. And it can feel that way because, you know, we can take it personally. And again, if we just shift our way of thinking about that, we realize that 99% of the time, you know, kids are they're trying to tell us something. And it's our job as parents to figure that out. And And many of us weren't raised that way. Many of us were raised in a way, you know, where we see behavior as something to be modified with carrots and sticks, you know, like you reward positive behavior, you punish negative behavior in an attempt to extinguish it. That's really been pretty definitively shown. Doesn't really lead to great relationships. So.
And really, we want good relationships, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because if you're trying to like kind of force a kid to behave a certain way, you know, if you try to coerce them, you might get short-term compliance,
but not long-term.
You never enhance the long-term relationship, and it never results in growth. So if you're trying to really promote long-term growth and you know, relationship building, coercing a child is never going to do it. You really want to work with them to figure it out together and let them know that you're heard, right? Because behavior just was going to escalate until a kid feels that they're being heard.
Right.
And so it's just going to keep going, getting, you know, they're just going to ratchet it up. Yeah. And that could really tick us off, you know, unless we start to see it in a way like, okay, I guess I'm not hearing it. And you keep drilling down and trying to figure it out. And then that's just so helpful as a parent. So can break that sort of, you know, cycle of how we may grew up ourselves and realize, maybe understanding behavior and what we're seeing in our kids in this light is much more useful.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I love it. And so much to think about.
Yeah. It's hard. It doesn't come naturally. It really, we really have to, because all of us get triggered too.
Yeah.
You know, we all have things that do push our buttons, you know, whether it's from our own background, how we grew up, you know, experiences that we've had. Everything that we experience gets filtered through decades of our own experience, right? And gets, you know, colored by that. Yeah. And so there might be certain things that our kids are doing that we feel our blood pressure rise. And then we have to think to ourselves, like, what is it about that? What is it about that, what my child's doing now that's making me so angry?
Oh, that's a good thing, yeah.
You know, maybe there's something that I need to work on. Maybe there's something unresolved in me. Maybe there's something in my past that, you know, happened to me that makes that so triggering for me. And I've seen that happen in parents. I see that happen in teachers. I see that happen in marriages, you know, when there's certain things your spouse does that is just so infuriating or frustrating, and you realize, I think I know why that is, because, you know, when I was growing up or when I was younger, you know, and I saw that happen, it really hurt me or touched me. And, and we see trauma, we see that really as being a triggering antecedent to a lot of things inside of us when there's certain things that we experience. And so sometimes that can be our kids, you know, our kids can trigger things in us because of what we've experienced. Yeah. And so we need to work on that. And not just blame the child or let it out on the kid, right? Because that's just confusing for them, right? You know, we're supposed to help them, and if we, you know, really get rough and harsh with them, that's very confusing for a kid. Very confusing.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There, we just covered all of pediatric mental health in a nutshell.
I think so.
15 minutes.
Okay, well, what is one thing that you could leave with those that are joining us that's encouraging as they work through healthy limits with technology and just boundaries in that?
I think always have, you know, the bigger picture in mind, you know, when you, always, you know, strive for the relationship. Ultimately, you want your kids to grow up so that when they're adults, they're like, hey, I want to come home and see my mom and dad, you know?
That'd be amazing.
I want to spend time with them. And even as teenagers, you know, your kids, my kids make fun of me all the time. They're like, Dad, dad joke, you know, you hear it all the time, right? Stupid dad joke. And they roll their eyes at me all the time. But, you know, I know deep inside they still want to be with me. I hope so anyways. But, you know, especially as they grow up and have adult lives of their own, you know, you want that relationship to be genuine, right? And not riddled with guilt and with, you know, feeling like it's kind of artificial, right? You want a real genuine relationship with your kids. So always fight for a relationship and really keep that bigger picture in mind. And so when there are disagreements, some things are worth getting into, but other things, it's okay to let some things go too. And it's also okay to actually let your kids make some mistakes. We can't be helicoptering around them all the time. And kids grow through trying out different things and a bit of trial and error, You want to keep your kids safe. You always want your kids to feel safe. You always want home to be a safe base for them. Yeah. And your relationship to be safe for them. And that should always be the case. And especially with teenagers, their safety should be your kind of like main concern. But beyond that, they're going to make some mistakes. They're going to lapse in judgment, and that's how they grow as well. So just we all need to just maybe chill a little bit as parents. And if we're not chill, then we should just go maybe go a little mindfulness and do some deep breathing, or like go on a retreat, or just go for a hike or something, and make sure that our blood pressure is down before we come back and interact with our kids.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
As always, Rob, so much information. I love it.
Okay, great. Well, I'm glad I could share it with you today.
Yeah, so again, thanks for being here.
Anytime.
For those joining us today, I hope that you were encouraged by my conversation with Rob. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, remember to subscribe on your podcast app. And for those watching the video edition, subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss an episode. Also, hop onto the discussion by following us on social media. You can find us on Instagram at 412 Canada. Looking forward to next time. Thanks for joining us.